Hello, my name is Doris Greenspoon and I am the CEO of the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, RNAO. I am absolutely thrilled to offer greetings from RNAO's Board of Directors and the entire RNAO Home Office staff to you all for joining this session and listening to the LTC bpso proposal requirements information session. You will be hearing today from Heather McConnell, Associate Director for the International Affairs and Best Practice Guidelines Program, and from Carol Holmes, who really leads the LTC program with 17 coordinators. We thank the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care for their active support of our program, and especially we thank you for your interest and for your willingness to share with us your expertise and for us to nurture that expertise through evidence-based practice. Let me just say a few words about the program. The Best Practice Guidelines program was launched in 1999 with government funding from Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, and today, as you may have heard, is also a national and international success, in addition to being, of course, a provincial success. As it relates to the best practice spotlight organizations, those were launched 10 years ago, and today we count with over 320 sites, both in Ontario, across Canada, and abroad, that are actively using, through a formal agreement with RNAO, the guidelines to improve patient outcomes, organizational and system outcomes. We are absolutely thrilled at RNAO to have been able now to tailor the Best Practice Spotlights organization program, in short called bpso, to the needs of the long-term care homes. We know that the homes have a different reality, the sector has a different reality, and we have inserted and embedded within the program tremendous level of support so that you can engage in being a bpso and can gain the same expertise and drive better and better outcomes for your residents, for your organizations, your homes, and for the system as a whole. With this, I leave you in the very expert hands of Heather McConnell and Carol Holmes, lead people at RNAO on this program, and I once again want to welcome you to the session and congratulate you for your interest and look forward to seeing you in the future as one of our leading bpso's for Ontario. Best wishes, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Doris. And thank you everyone for joining us today for this information session on the Long-Term Care Best Practice Spotlight Organization proposal requirements. My name is Carol Holmes, and I'm the Acting Program Manager for the Long-Term Care Best Practice Program at RNAO. Joining me is Heather McConnell, and Heather is the Associate Director for Guideline Implementation and Knowledge Transfer in the International Affairs and Best Practice Guidelines Center at RNAO. Here's the outline for today's session. We'll be providing you with some brief highlights of the bpso initiative, discussing the eligibility requirements for the long-term care bpso. We'll also discuss the requirements within the request for proposal. We'll have opportunities for questions and clarification, and we'll be sharing with you the next steps and important dates. A quick reminder for you about RNAO. RNAO is the professional association for registered nurses in Ontario, and we provide the strong, credible voice leading the nursing profession to influence and promote healthy public policy and clinical excellence. And the Best Practice Guidelines program is a signature program. at RNAO. The mandate of the International Affairs and Best Practice Guidelines Center is to develop, disseminate, and actively support the uptake of evidence-based clinical and healthy work environment best practice guidelines, and to evaluate their impact on patients, residents, organizations, and health system outcomes. And we're funded by the Ontario Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. The Long-Term Care Best Practices Program, our aim is to enhance the quality of care for residents in long-term care homes and create a culture of evidence-based practice by encouraging and supporting staff in long-term care to use RNAO's best practice guidelines. And we're also funded by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. I'm going to turn things over to Heather now, who will talk about the RNAO Best Practice Guideline Program and lead you into the discussion of the long-term care BPSO requirements.
Thank you so much, Carol, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you again very much for joining this session. The slide that you're looking at now is really the framework that guides the work of the Best Practice Guidelines Program. You'll notice at the top, a circle is really the reflection of the guideline development process that we use in terms of the methodology to develop the guidelines themselves. You'll note that we move from topic selection through identification of a panel of experts who bring their clinical and academic knowledge to the guideline development process. We go through a systematic review process that informs the guideline recommendations, and then the actual recommendation development and discussion of evidence. The external stakeholder review process is a critical stage of the guideline development process, and in fact, many of you may have in fact participated as either stakeholder reviewers for our clinical or our healthy work environment best practice guidelines. Once the guidelines are published, they then move into our deployment and implementation cycle, which is the circle on the bottom left-hand corner. You'll note that this includes such things as champions, our best practice champions network, advanced clinical practice fellowships, our virtual RNAO communities, nursing order sets, and our best practice spotlight organization initiative, which of course is the focus of today's presentation. Moving from deployment and implementation support, we're really focused on evaluation and monitoring. So this includes such things as quality improvement processes, outcome indicators, patient outcomes, of course, and the use of NQuire, nursing quality indicators for reporting and evaluation. And that's an indicator database that I'll speak to a little later on in the session today. All of this work, of course, is to help support and impact in a positive way outcomes for the nurses, patients, clients, or residents, organizations, and the healthcare system as a whole. When we look at actual implementation, so now we're looking at the deployment and implementation cycle, you can tell by looking at that in fact we have various different levels that we support uptake of best practice guidelines. At the individual level with our champions network, learning institutes, e-learning programs, the various resources we have available for mobile technology, and our nursing order sets, which are integrated with our best practice guideline recommendations. At the organizational level, as I said, our best practice spotlight organization designation program, which of course is the focus of today's discussion. And systems level, we have a variety of implementation projects, both at the provincial and the national level, that help support the uptake of best practice guidelines in either particular sectors or on particular topic issues. And of course, the Long-Term Care Best Practices Initiative is an example of a systems level implementation program. But today the focus is going to be on the Best Practice Spotlight Organization Designation Program. The goal of the Best Practice Spotlight Organization is to influence the uptake of best practice guidelines across all healthcare organizations to enable practice excellence and positive client or resident outcomes. We have tailored a program specifically for the long-term care Best Practice Spotlight Organization participants. And this is an opportunity for long-term care homes to partner with RNAO to create evidence-based cultures in their organizations through systematic implementation of multiple RNAO best practice guidelines. And I'll review the objectives with you, which are to establish dynamic, long-term partnerships with long-term care settings that focus on making an impact on resident care through supporting knowledge-based nursing practice, being able to demonstrate creative, contextualized strategies for successfully implementing best practice guidelines at the individual and organizational level, and of course in this situation, really focusing on the long-term care context. Establish and utilize effective approaches to evaluate implementation in long-term care, utilizing appropriate structure, process, and outcome indicators. And finally, to identify effective strategies for system-wide dissemination of guideline implementation and outcomes particularly targeted to long-term care. Within the Best Practice Spotlight Organization initiative, organizations partner with rnao to implement multiple best practice guidelines over a 3-year period, and at the end of that 3-year period, assuming all the deliverables are met, they attain the bpso designation. There is a formal application process that results as a result of the request for proposal, which of course is now launched and available to download from our website. And once proposals are reviewed and accepted, a formal partnership with the rnao is established. The specific requirements include systematic BPG implementation, the establishment of an infrastructure to support guideline work, regular reporting requirements from the bpso site to the rnao, highlighting the work that's in progress and the plans for the future, opportunities for knowledge exchange, sustainability planning, and again a focus on measuring outcomes through the use of standard indicators. Once designated, after that 3-year period, bpso's demonstrate sustained use of best practice guidelines, expansion to other areas of their organization, spread within team members, and opportunities to mentor other organizations who are just starting their bpso journey with best practice guideline implementation. This is just an image of the various different individual organizations that have participated in the bpso initiative to date through the province of Ontario that represent long-term care, public health, acute care, community care, home health care, public health nursing, and of course long-term care. Within the, nationally and internationally, we've actually been able to spread the work of the bpso's to include 68 distinct best practice spotlight organizations at 310 sites across the world. Obviously those in Canada that I've mentioned, the United States, Chile, Colombia, Spain, and Australia are also organizations or sites where bpso's have joined this network, international network of organizations who are committed to evidence-based practice and guideline implementation. There's been a number of successes, and these results have come from a survey that we last did in 2011 with our bpso's, but thousands of nurses have been involved in impacting the care of outcomes of over, at that time, 1 million clients or residents. The guidelines with the greatest impact on client outcomes were those that included falls, pain, screening for delirium, dementia, depression, and wound care. And the guidelines with the greatest impact on practice included many of those, again, falls, pain, screening for delirium, dementia, and depression, wound care, and professionalism in nursing. And some of the key sustainability strategies that these organizations identified at that time included such things as staff orientation and education, integration of best practices within policies, documentation and records, quality improvement program activities. And certainly all of this had an impact on client outcomes and economic results. Now what I'd like to talk a little bit about is the long-term care bpso eligibility criteria. Now these details are outlined in detail in the RFP that you've been able to download from our website, but I'd like to walk through the eligibility criteria with you just to highlight some of the areas that we're really looking for to be able to ensure that organizations that apply for the bpso are in a situation to be successful. So we're looking at long-term care homes are considered eligible to apply for the request for proposals if they meet the following criteria: that they have demonstrated a commitment to evidence-based practice on previous implementation of one or more rnao clinical practice guidelines, and they have supported staff to participate in opportunities to develop capacity in evidence-based practice. And these opportunities may include such things as the rnao Best Practice Champions Network, or potentially participating in the Advanced Clinical Practice Fellowships that are offered through rnao and rpnao, attendance at best practice guidelines institutes or other evidence-based educational opportunities, or participation in sector-specific provincial quality improvement capacity building initiatives, which I know many of your organizations have been involved in. We're also looking for organizations that have strong and explicit support from the board, if that's applicable for your organization, senior management, the clinical nursing staff, union, and other key stakeholders to support evidence-based practice, and a demonstrated support to the nursing profession and to the implementation of RNAO's best practice guidelines. And we'll talk about some of those support requirements later in the session. Those organizations that have a vision and mission or a strategic plan that provides an opportunity for leveraging other initiatives related to evidence-based practice and resident safety will enhance their experience. And they have a senior nurse leader in the role of administrator or director of care or equivalent who is a member of the senior management team. Additional eligibility criteria include the capacity to implement, monitor, and evaluate best practice guidelines, including the collection and submission of data on a variety of outcomes. And again, this is in relationship to the requirement to participate in Inquire, which again we'll speak to a little later on. And have the capacity to allocate a best practice spotlight organization liaison who will be a staff member at the long-term care home, who will work with the rnao long-term care best practice spotlight organization coach to support guideline implementation, evaluation, and sustainability. Organizations that are eligible will have demonstrated ability to engage in successful partnerships within the healthcare community, both within and beyond the long-term care sector, and have the capacity to meet the requirements of the terms and conditions of the designation. So this is the post that initial 3-year partnership period in order to maintain the long-term care BPSO status. And this designation is renewable every 2 years, assuming criteria are met. So what I'd like to speak to now, just briefly, are the long-term care BPSO requirements. And again, these are detailed in the RFP itself, but I'd like to walk you through some of this work so that you can understand the various requirements and deliverables associated with the BPSO initiative. And they fall in a variety of categories, including implementation, capacity building, evaluation and research, dissemination, sustainability, and resource availability. And I'll speak to each one of these separately. At minimum, the long-term care BPSO organizations will commit to engaging in a 3-year partnership with rnao to be reviewed and renewed annually, provided criteria are met. And they've also commit to contribute the necessary financial resources to support guideline implementation and sustainability during this initial 3-year period, during this partnership and beyond. Now, with respect to implementation, what the requirement here is that the organizations that applied through this RFP will commit to implementing and or expanding the implementation of a minimum of 3 clinical guidelines from the list that you'll see here on this slide. And again, these details are included in the RFP document itself. So it's a minimum of 3 guidelines selected from this list. One of those 3 must be implemented across the entire organization. The other 2 can be implemented across the entire organization or within very specific programs or areas or units within the long-term care home in order to meet the needs of the resident population. Certainly, if organizations are interested in implementing more than 3 guidelines, you're welcome to select any additional guidelines beyond 3 from this list or from the larger options offered through our 39 clinical best practice guidelines that are available. A listing of those are available on the rnao website. Preference will be given to those organizations in terms of scoring their proposal who select guidelines from the key priority areas identified by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care that align with the regulations and mandatory programs. And again, the details of that are included in the request for proposal document. Capacity building is another critical element related to the BPSO experience. And what we really have identified is the need to have a strong cohort of staff who are able to understand the concepts of evidence-based practice and the implementation approach to support practice change within your organizations. And so here we're really looking to the commitment of the BPSO organization to support a cohort of approximately 15% of their caregiving staff, which is a combination of RNs, RPNs, nurse practitioners, PSWs, and allied health, to be able to support the work that you're doing in guideline implementation. Will also involve participation in the Advanced Clinical Practice Fellowship Program, the Summer Institutes, and various different other knowledge exchange opportunities that will be offered through the BPSO initiative, all again with a focus of developing capacity, knowledge, and skills related to guideline implementation, recognizing that many of those skills are transferable and can be used to support ongoing implementation and sustainability activities. Evaluation and research requirements related to the BPSO initiative in long-term care, again, are linked back to the nursing quality indicators for reporting and evaluation, and the NQuire database, which monitors a variety of indicators on both structure, process, and outcome indicators for various guidelines themselves and various sectors. So part of being involved in NQuire would be working with the rnao to identify from the list of existing indicators which are most appropriate for the long-term care homes based on the guidelines that they're implementing, and also reflecting on what other information and indicators you're already collecting through various mechanisms that you have in place currently within your long-term care homes. So this is a very collaborative effort on being able to ensure that the indicators that you're selecting and monitoring are relevant and meaningful to you and your staff. Dissemination is another critical component of the BPSO initiative, and there's certainly lots of opportunities for BPSOs to participate in this work. We would anticipate and expect that the long-term care homes participating as BPSOs would disseminate the work that they're doing in terms of their key learnings and the outcomes that they're experiencing related to guideline implementation in a variety of ways. That might involve presenting at conferences, whether they're local, provincial, national, or international. It could involve speaking as faculty at an rnao event at the invitation of rnao. It may involve sharing implementation resources that you've created with the broader healthcare community through the rnao website, and also an expectation that there'd be opportunities throughout the 3-year period to write a manuscript for publication for either a peer-reviewed or a non-peer-reviewed journal that would describe the BPSO experience and the outcomes. And certainly that would be something that would be written with the long-term care home, but also with the support of the long-term care BPSO coach. rnao then commits to providing the long-term care BPSO organization with an orientation to the initiative, to provide expert consultation on guideline implementation and uptake through the support of an assigned long-term care BPSO coach, which would be equivalent to a 0.2 full-time equivalent, which is 1 day per week, through the long-term care best practices program. And here we would see that the long-term care BPSO coach would be the best practice coordinator assigned to the LHIN in which you're located. rnao commits to facilitating participation in a network of BPSO liaisons. So again, that would be opportunities for each BPSO liaison and each of the individual BPSOs to join together on a regular basis via virtual technology to be able to share their experiences, learnings, opportunities, and share resources together. rnao will also host and cover the expenses through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care's funding source for the long-term care staff to attend the annual BPSO Knowledge Exchange Symposium, which is held annually in Toronto and includes all of the BPSOs who have yet to be designated or have been designated for a number of years to support continued capacity development, dissemination, and networking with these other BPSO organizations. And in that group, we have organizations who were pioneer BPSOs who joined us in 2003, so there's over a decade of experience of guideline implementation within this group. Now I'm going to move on now to the proposal evaluation, and the details of this are included in your RFP starting on page 13. And I'll just review the weighting of the scoring for the proposal elements, and then I'll walk through each one of these separately to provide some detail related to what we're looking for in this aspect of the proposal. So scope of work is worth 20% of the overall scoring. Organizational support, 20%. Previous experience with guideline implementation, and that's specifically rnao guideline implementation, is at 15%. The long-term care BPSO team's knowledge, skill, and experience at 15. The capacity to deliver on the long-term care BPSO requirements and sustain outcomes at 15%, and financial contribution through a detailed budget at 15%. Now, I do want to highlight here that this is a competitive process, that we are aiming to select one successful long-term care BPSO from each of the 14 LHINs across the province of Ontario, recognizing that the distribution of submissions may impact on that. But it is a competitive process, and so as I'm reviewing this next section, I just invite you to think about how you might respond to some of these questions in being able to highlight the strengths of your particular long-term care home. So scope of work being worth 20% of the proposal, and this is really a critical element. It provides an overview of the proposal and what you're intending to do through your BPSO experience. We'd expect a description of the long-term care home, the size, the staff mix, the staffing model. Are you a standalone home or part of a corporation? How are you planning to implement guidelines within your structure? We'd also like you to identify the guidelines that you're going to implement and the timelines that you'll implement them within. So within the 3-year time period, you may choose to start the implementation and or expansion of a particular guideline and then move on to the 2nd and 3rd, or maybe 4th and 5th towards the 2nd year and into the 3rd. How did you actually select the guidelines for implementation? What gaps will they fill? How did you identify those gaps? How did you engage the staff in setting priorities for what the work would entail? And the scope of the proposed approach, again, this really links back to, are we looking at implementing these guidelines across your entire long-term care home or multiple sites of a corporation? Are we looking at implementing this guideline within one unit in your long-term care home? How many staff will it impact? How many residents will receive care based on the guideline recommendations? We would like you to identify short and long-term goals for your BPSO experience. I've shared with you the goals and objectives of the initiative overall, but certainly within your own teams and your own long-term care homes, you'll have short and long-term goals that you'd like to achieve and are using the BPSO initiative to move towards them. There is a template provided in the RFP to summarize the guidelines that will be implemented and what units and the staff that will be involved, but we would expect that during this section or in this section there'd be adequate narrative to help us understand the scope of this work and the impact it will have on your residents, their families, and the staff who work in your homes. Organizational support is the next element of the proposal, and it's worth 20% of the overall score. We do want to ensure that there's recognition that this is a 3-year partnership that will continue after the designation period has been achieved. We'd like a description of organizational support from all levels of the organization, including staff support from all relevant disciplines. As we really have found through our work over the last 10 years with a wide range of organizations, that having that organizational support at all levels, at senior management, at the board, family and residents, staff in various caregiving roles, it's incredibly important that we have a clear understanding of the level of support that you have from your staff and the engagement that you've been able to achieve through the proposal writing process and prior to that in terms of your preparation through evidence-based practice projects. Here again we see an opportunity to identify the senior nurse leader who will act as the executive sponsor potentially, and then of course letters of support from all of those key stakeholders indicating their support for this work and the engagement that they have with the long-term care BPSO program. Continuing on with proposal requirements, reflecting on previous experience with rnao BPG implementation, again, and this is with 15% of the overall scoring. We'd like you to provide a description of the BPGs that have already been implemented and or are currently being implemented within your long-term care home. What existing infrastructure do you have to monitor those activities? What committees or steering committee or teams, implementation teams do you have currently in place? What implementation strategies are being used? What have you found to be effective? What have you identified works best for your various teams or your organization as a whole? What resources have you allocated? What challenges or barriers have you identified and come across during your implementation activities, and what approaches have you taken to address them? Again, this helps us understand your past experience, with guideline implementation and will help us provide support to enhance and build on your successes to date. We'd also like you to describe in this section staff engagement and links to capacity building opportunities. So how are you using your best practice champions? Do you have any advanced clinical practice fellowship participants in your long-term care home, either from rnao or rpnao, who would be able to help support evidence-based practice implementation? Have you had any institute attendees that have attended any of the rnao events? Have you used the work of the various different provincial quality improvement initiatives? How are you integrating those individuals who have participated in your bpso work? And finally, how have you used your long-term care best practice coordinator within your LHIN to support your guideline implementation? The next section of the proposal is focusing on the team's knowledge, skill, and experience. So this is within your long-term care home and the team that's going to be leading and working directly with the guideline implementation. And again, this is worth 15%. So here we're looking for an overview of the structure. How will the implementation be managed? Will there be one person that will be responsible for this work? Will there be a team of people? Will there be a steering committee? Will there be a quality committee? Who's going to monitor and supervise the activities that are going on within the long-term care home related to the best practice spotlight organization deliverables? What do you see the role of the long-term care BPSO coach taking? Again, this is an rnao employee who will be working with your team 1 day a week, and we would very much appreciate an understanding of how you see them best working with you. We'd anticipate that this role will be a combination of virtual support through web-based technology, as well as in-person site visits and on-site support. So again, reflecting on what might work best for you. We would expect that the resume of the long-term care BPSO project liaison be included in the RFP application, so we have an understanding of their skills and experience and the leadership role that they play within the long-term care home. And we'd also like to have an understanding of how you anticipate integrating teams that are currently working on Ministry of Health required programs and other quality improvement initiatives. How will they integrate with this work? Because their knowledge and skill that they'll bring will help contribute to quality outcomes for your BPSO activities. Next section is focusing on the capacity to deliver on long-term care BPSO requirements and sustain the outcomes that you achieve. And again, this is 15% of the overall score. Here we're looking at what internal resources do you have available to help support you in your quality improvement work. Is that management expertise, equipment access, IT support, other resources that you have, human resources that you have available to support you in the work that you're undertaking. Evidence of access to information technology, whether that be access to databases, research databases, libraries, schools of nursing, and other universities where you might be able to access information. Capacity to participate in evaluation requirements. Again, here we'd look for examples of data collection systems that you're currently using. What are you already collecting data on? And that will help us understand how that data might be able to be used to support your Enquire requirements. How do you plan to sustain capacity development opportunities, recognizing that obviously over time staff will change, leaders might change, clinicians might change, but how are you going to be able to continue to support those leaders within your organization through capacity development opportunities? Again, that might be through best practice champions programs, quality improvement initiative, attendance at institutes, other professional development opportunities. And here we'd also like to have some evidence of involvement in other initiatives of similar scope. And this refers back to one of the eligibility criteria I mentioned earlier about partnerships. What other activities have you been involved in, either in your local community, within your LHIN, with provincial initiatives that really reflect your commitment to evidence-based practice and enhancing the quality of experience for the residents in your care? And the final proposal evaluation criteria is the financial contribution of 15%. And here we're looking for an annual budget details for 3 years. So we want 3 budgets over 3 years, actual and or in-kind contributions. So this could be actual financial dollars that you're going to be putting towards particular activities within your BPSO activities, or it could be in-kind contributions. And a template is provided in the RFP to help you summarize those contributions. You'll note that the rnao contributions have been included in a sample template, and you can use that as a guide for the work that you're going to be summarizing. But we would ask you to consider human resources, any special consultations that you might need to have to help support you in the work beyond what the long-term care BPSO coach will be providing, quality improvement, monitoring and evaluation, any expenses related to education and training, and the development or purchase of implementation resources. Now, the review process, as I indicated, this is a competitive process, and we do have a structured review process that allows us to identify the successful applicants. We do have a long-term care BPSO review committee. Each proposal will be reviewed independently by 4 to 5 reviewers using an established scoring matrix. So I've shared with you the overall weighting of the various sections of the proposals based on 100% score. But within each of those elements, we have some specific criteria we're looking for to help us achieve a very consistent approach to scoring these particular proposals. So we want to ensure that we're being consistent and transparent across the scores. So each proposal will be reviewed by 4 to 5 reviewers, and those reviewers will be members of the Long-Term Care Best Practice Coordinator Program. They may be other rnao staff members who have expertise working with BPSOs, as well as BPSO leads who have had experience working with the implementation of best practice guidelines and can bring their expertise to the review of the proposals. Successful applicants will be identified, and our goal, as I mentioned earlier, is to select one successful applicant per LIN, and again, obviously this is going to depend on our submission distribution. And applicants will be informed in writing of the status of their application by the rnao once the review process is complete. So I'd like to share with you at this point some important dates. The RFP release is the week of December the 16th. And so that the RFP, now that you're watching this particular webinar, you should have a copy of the RFP already. The letter of intent is due January the 20th. And January the 20th is the date that we would expect that organizations would provide us with an indication that they're planning to submit a proposal. The letter of intent is a fairly simple requirement in that it is an email that needs to be sent to Sitlali Singh at the rnao. And again, more details about this can be found on page 13 of the RFP. The confirmation of receipt, and we need to receive that by 4 o'clock p.m. on January the 20th. Now, the letter of intent is not binding, but it does give us, and so organizations may choose to withdraw their letter of intent prior to the submission deadline. We hope that you won't do that, but certainly if that's a need, we do understand that things may impact on your ability to submit a proposal. But the proposal, or the letter of intent, requires the name of the long-term care home and the key contact person at that home, an indication that the requirements of the request for proposal are understood, and a description of the organizational support that has led to the intent to submit letter. We will provide a confirmation of letter of intent receipt, and this again will help us plan for the review process. The RFP deadline is February the 19th, 2014, and we'll expect all proposals in the rnao office by 4 o'clock p.m. on February the 19th. The proposal itself needs to be no more than 15 pages, single-spaced, and that will not include any appendices if you choose to include in the application. We do ask that you will provide not only a hard copy of your proposal, but also for original hard copy with signatures, but 4 additional copies that we will use to circulate to our review committee so that they receive the proposal exactly as you submitted it, and also an electronic copy that you can provide either on a memory stick or a CD or other device so that we have an electronic copy of your proposal. The release of the results will be in early March 2014, so from February the 17th to early March we'll be going through the review process and looking at the various different proposals and making our selections. And then once the results have been released to all of the applicants, we are planning a long-term care BPSO launch where we'll bring together all of the successful BPSOs who have applied for this RFP to an event in Toronto in April of 2014, and of course that day is yet to be determined. If you do have any questions, questions must be received in writing or by email no later than February the 12th, 2014, and should be submitted to Siblali Singh, and her email address is there on this slide as well as in the RFP itself. And those will come to the attention of myself, and I will prepare a written response to any of the questions that you might have related to the RFP. So again, important dates: the RFP has been released, the letter of intent, January the 20th, the RFP deadline, February 19th, the release of the results in early March with our BPSO launch in April 2014. I'm going to turn things over to Carol now, just to wrap up.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today for this information session on the Long-Term Care Best Practice Spotlight Organization. We thank you for your time and for your interest in this initiative, and look forward to hearing from you further. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.